There is a small clay tablet in the British Museum. It is barely wider than a few fingers. Its surface is covered with wedge-shaped marks pressed into wet clay more than 4,000 years ago. The marks record payments. 5 people are named. Each receives a quantity of silver, measured in shekels. The tablet comes from ancient Mesopotamia, and it dates to the 3rd millennium BCE. There is something missing. No coins. No stamped metal discs. No king's portrait. No paper notes. No wallet. No bank. The people who made this record lived thousands of years before modern finance, yet they were already doing something unmistakably monetary. They could measure what was owed. They could compare values. They could settle accounts in standardized units. They could write those obligations down so the memory of a transaction survived the people involved. That creates a strange problem for the familiar story of money. We are often told that humans began by bartering. One farmer had wheat. Another had goats. Trading was awkward, so eventually someone invented coins. Coins became paper. Paper became credit cards. And now money has become numbers on screens. It is a beautifully simple story. The evidence is not, because coins are not the beginning of money. Credit is not necessarily a late invention, and nobody has found the moment when a frustrated goat owner finally solved barter by inventing the dollar. So how did humans actually invent money? The answer begins not with shopping, but with owing. Imagine a small community without coins. That does not mean everyone has to negotiate a direct swap every time they need something. Families share food. Neighbors lend tools. Hunters distribute meat. People give gifts at weddings and expect help during harvest. Somebody watches your children today because you helped repair their roof last season. No one needs to calculate the exact exchange rate between 1 afternoon of childcare and 3 hours of roof work. The relationship remembers. Anthropologists have documented many societies where exchange works through gifts, reciprocity, communal distribution, obligation, and credit. Barter certainly exists. Humans can swap one object directly for another, and they have done so for a very long time. What is much harder to demonstrate is the textbook world of a whole economy organized primarily around strangers, constantly swapping goods in spot transactions. Cambridge anthropologist Caroline Humphrey made this point forcefully in 1985. The ethnographic record, she argued, does not give us a documented example of a pure barter economy from which money then naturally emerged. That does not prove barter played no role in monetary history. It means the neat sequence is a hypothesis, not an archaeological fact. And once communities grow, another problem becomes more important than finding somebody who wants exactly what you have. Memory fails. If 20 relatives share food, everybody has some sense of who contributes and who takes. If 2,000 farmers, herders, craftsmen, laborers, merchants, and officials are moving goods through temples, warehouses, and markets, informal memory is no longer enough. Who delivered barley? Who has already been paid? How much wool is owed next month? How much grain belongs to the temple? How much silver clears this debt? Before money could become an object people carried, value had to become something people could count. That transformation becomes visible in ancient Mesopotamia. By the 4th and 3rd millennia BCE, southern Mesopotamia contained dense settlements, irrigated agriculture, temples, workshops, and increasingly complex systems for collecting and distributing goods. Administrators recorded grain, livestock, labor, and rations on clay. Writing itself developed in close association with this world of accounting. The remarkable thing is that a unit used to measure value did not have to be physically present in every transaction. Consider the shekel. Today, the word sounds like the name of a coin or currency. Originally, in Mesopotamia, the shekel was a weight. A mina was divided into 60 shekels. A shekel could be connected in accounting systems to measured quantities of silver and, in some contexts, other commodities. Silver was particularly useful. It did not rot. It could be divided. It concentrated substantial value into a small amount of material. And unlike a cow or sack of barley, a piece of silver could survive a long journey without eating, leaking, or dying. But early Mesopotamians did not need to stamp every piece into a coin. They weighed it. This distinction matters. A merchant could owe another merchant several shekels of silver, even when no little round object called a shekel existed. A contract could specify a debt in silver. An administrator could compare commodities through an accounting standard. Payment might later be made in silver, grain, or another accepted form depending on place and circumstance. Money could therefore function partly as a language before it became a manufactured product. It allowed unlike things to become comparable. A quantity of barley, a piece of land, months of labor, an animal, a fine, a loan. Once those things could be expressed in common units, society had acquired something extraordinarily powerful. A ruler could tax in it. A merchant could price in it. A lender could demand repayment in it. And a court could enforce it. That last step changes the nature of obligation. If your neighbor remembers that you owe him a favor, the debt exists inside a relationship. If an institution records that you owe 10 units of something, the debt can begin to exist independently of personal memory. The tablet remembers for him. 4,000 years ago, Assyrian merchants were operating long-distance trading networks between northern Mesopotamia and Anatolia. They moved textiles and tin, acquired silver and gold, formed partnerships, lent capital, and sent detailed instructions across enormous distances. Their communications traveled on clay tablets, sometimes enclosed inside clay envelopes. Trust had become portable. A merchant no longer had to stand beside his partner to conduct business. A written obligation could travel where the person could not. That is one of the deepest changes money made possible. It allowed economic relationships to stretch across time and distance. But it also made inequality measurable. One surviving Neo-Assyrian contract in the British Museum records the sale of 3 enslaved people for 30 shekels of silver. That is a brutal sentence. Yet it reveals one of money's powers with unusual clarity. A monetary system can translate almost anything into a number. Grain, land, work, taxes, damages. And, in societies that permitted slavery, human beings, money did not create exploitation. People exploited one another long before coins existed. Money made some forms of exploitation easier to calculate, transfer, and enforce. That dual nature never disappeared. The same technology that lets a farmer borrow seed can let a creditor seize his property. The same standard that allows wages to be compared allows taxes to be extracted. The same accounting system that coordinates thousands of workers allows a palace to know exactly how much each household owes. Money expands cooperation. It expands power too. And Mesopotamia was only one part of the story. Across the world, humans used an astonishing range of valuable objects in exchange and payment. Shells became important in parts of Africa and Asia. Metal circulated in weighed pieces. Cattle could represent wealth. Cloth, grain, and other commodities sometimes served monetary roles. There was never one universal object waiting to become money. Different communities selected different materials because their problems were different. But successful monetary objects often shared useful properties. They were recognizable. Difficult enough to obtain that people could not create unlimited quantities at will. Durable enough to survive. Portable enough to move. Divisible enough to make different-sized payments. And above everything else, other people had to accept them. A beautiful shell that nobody wants is decoration. A piece of silver nobody trusts is metal. Money is social. That becomes especially obvious when the first coins appear. Around the late 7th century BCE, in Lydia and neighboring Greek cities in western Anatolia, people began producing small pieces of electrum, a natural alloy of gold and silver, according to standardized weights. Then they stamped them. Some bore simple marks. Others carried images, including the lion associated with Lydian royal authority. This is one of the great technological jumps in monetary history. Not because nobody had used precious metal before. They had. The breakthrough was that somebody else had done part of the measuring for you. Before coinage, imagine receiving a piece of silver from a stranger. How heavy is it? How pure? Has somebody clipped a little from the edge? Are you holding precious metal or a clever fraud? Every transaction contains a testing problem. A stamped coin changes the question. The mark effectively says, an issuing authority stands behind this object. You still need trust. But now, the trust is standardized. Instead of weighing every piece of metal from scratch, people can increasingly recognize a denomination, count units, and move on. That saves time. And timescales. A technology that saves a minute in one transaction saves thousands of hours across a city full of transactions. Exactly why the earliest Lydian coins were produced remains uncertain. Scholars have proposed trade, state payments, taxation, and other institutional purposes. The surviving evidence does not let us watch the first mint master explain the plan. What is clear is what happened next. Coinage spread. Under Croesus, the famous 6th century BCE king of Lydia, the kingdom produced separate gold and silver coinage. Greek cities developed their own issues. Coins traveled with merchants, soldiers, and states. And the images on them became political. A coin was no longer merely a measured piece of valuable material. It was a tiny official message. This owl comes from Athens. This ruler guarantees this coin. This symbol belongs to this city. Money became one of the most widely circulated pieces of state media ever invented. A monument might stand in one square. A coin could pass through 10,000 hands. The connection between money and political authority deepened because states discovered a useful loop. A government could demand payment in a certain currency. It could also spend that currency. Soldiers, officials, suppliers, and workers receiving coins then had a reason to accept them, especially where taxes and other obligations could be settled with the same money. Money helped states mobilize resources from strangers. States helped make particular kinds of money more acceptable. Neither side of that loop had to be absolute. Private credit, foreign coins, and commodities continued to circulate. Ancient economies were mixtures, not perfectly sealed national currency systems. But the link between money and authority was becoming difficult to separate. And even coinage was not a single invention spreading from one genius. China developed a very different monetary tradition. Bronze casting had existed there for centuries before states began producing objects we identify as early coins. During the first millennium BCE, different regions issued forms resembling miniature spades and knives. Later, round bronze coins became increasingly important. India also developed early coinage. Current scholarship, therefore, points toward multiple centers of monetary innovation rather than one birthplace for every coin on Earth. Different societies faced similar problems. How do you make value portable? How do you make payment recognizable? How do you reduce the cost of checking every transaction? Humans repeatedly converged on standardized monetary objects. And then, in China, somebody made one of the strangest leaps of all. They began moving value without moving the valuable object. Metal coins are useful, but they are heavy. That becomes a serious problem when the coins are made from relatively low-value metals. Paying for a large purchase can mean transporting an absurd weight of copper or iron. Chinese merchants developed methods to leave coins in one place and carry documentation instead. During the Tang period, so-called flying money functioned more like a remittance instrument than circulating currency. The paper represented a claim somewhere else. That idea grew more powerful under the Song dynasty. In Sichuan around the beginning of the 11th century, private merchants issued notes known as jiaozi. People could use paper claims instead of hauling heavy strings of metal coins through commerce. This was an extraordinary conceptual move. A metal coin contains material somebody wants. A paper note contains almost nothing. The fiber is cheap. The ink is cheap. If you shred the note, its material value is trivial. What makes it valuable is the promise. Eventually, the Song government took control of jiaozi issuance. By 1023, official administration had entered the system. Now money had moved another step away from the object itself. The valuable thing was no longer necessarily what you held. It was the institution behind it. This also revealed a danger that would haunt paper money forever. Paper is easier to make than silver. That is its advantage. It is also the trap. A ruler cannot create a mountain of silver with a printing block. A government can create a mountain of paper claims. If the supply of claims expands far beyond confidence in what they can purchase or redeem, the value of each claim can fall. Chinese dynasties repeatedly encountered this problem in different forms. Paper currency could solve transport and liquidity problems spectacularly, yet excessive issuance could damage the trust on which the system depended. The lesson was not that paper money could never work. The lesson was that money had become an exercise in institutional restraint. You can see the importance of trust on surviving Chinese notes. A Ming note in the Bank of England Museum, issued in the late 14th century, is printed on paper made from mulberry bark. It shows the coins that paper was replacing, and it carries a severe warning against counterfeiting. The threat makes sense. Once the material itself is cheap, authenticity becomes everything. With a lump of gold, nature helps authenticate value because gold is difficult to obtain. With paper, society has to do more of that work. Printers, seals, signatures, special paper, official penalties, and later watermarks all became part of an arms race between currency makers and counterfeiters. Europe eventually made a similar transition by a different route. Merchants had long used written credit instruments to avoid moving dangerous quantities of metal. Goldsmiths and bankers could hold valuables and issue receipts or promises. Such documents could become convenient substitutes for the metal locked away elsewhere. Again, the physical object began to disappear behind a claim. In 1661, Stockholm's Banco in Sweden issued European banknotes. The Bank of England, founded in 1694, soon issued notes payable to the bearer. A banknote was effectively saying something remarkable. You do not have the metal. You have our promise concerning the metal. If people trust the promise begins to circulate almost like the thing itself. That is the trick. Money increasingly became a claim on an institution, and institutions spent centuries trying to make those claims believable. Banks built impressive buildings. Governments regulated issuers. Notes acquired signatures, engravings, serial numbers, and complex anti-counterfeiting features. Financial architecture became psychological architecture. The public had to believe that tomorrow's money would still work. Gold remained one way to strengthen that belief. Under various gold standard arrangements, paper currencies could be linked to specified amounts of gold. The attraction was easy to understand. A paper note might feel abstract, but convertibility promised something physical behind it. Yet gold created constraints of its own. Economic activity could grow faster than monetary gold supplies. Financial crises could create sudden demand for conversion. Governments fighting wars needed resources far beyond what their gold reserves conveniently allowed. The history of modern money became a repeated negotiation between rigid credibility and flexible supply. Britain abandoned the domestic gold standard in 1931. After the Second World War, the Bretton Woods system created a different international arrangement. Other major currencies were tied to the US dollar, while official foreign holders of dollars could ultimately convert them into gold at a fixed price. For a time, the system worked. Then the promises became larger than the gold supporting the promise. By the late 1960s, growing quantities of dollars were held outside the United States while American gold reserves were limited. Confidence in convertibility weakened. On August 15, 1971, President Richard Nixon suspended the conversion of dollars held by foreign monetary authorities into gold. The gold window closed. Money did not disappear the next morning. People still went to work. Stores still accepted dollars. Banks still maintained accounts. Taxes still came due. Employers still paid wages. That fact reveals perhaps the most important thing about modern money. Its value had never depended only on metal. A modern currency works because an enormous network of institutions and expectations makes it work. Governments accept it for obligations. Courts recognize contracts written in it. Employers pay in it. Shops price in it. Banks settle claims denominated in it. Central banks manage the monetary system around it. Millions of people expect millions of other people to continue accepting it tomorrow. This is often described as fiat money. The phrase can make it sound imaginary, but all money contains an element of collective belief. Gold does not tell you its price. A shell does not declare that it can pay a debt. A silver coin cannot force a merchant to accept it. Money works when enough people and institutions treat a monetary unit as a reliable bridge between what you give now and what you may receive later. And the strangest part of the story is that, after thousands of years of inventing increasingly elaborate physical money, most modern money stopped being physical again. Look at your bank balance. Those numbers are not a pile of banknotes with your name written on them. They are a record of what a bank owes you. In that sense, modern money has returned to something surprisingly close to its ancient form: an account. Commercial banks create a large share of the money used in modern economies when they make loans. Suppose a bank approves a mortgage. It normally does not open a vault, locate a stack of pre-existing cash equal to the mortgage, put it into a truck, and deliver it to the borrower. It credits an account. A new bank deposit appears alongside a loan obligation. New deposit money has been created. When loans are repaid, corresponding deposit money can be extinguished. That does not mean banks can create unlimited wealth. Lending is constrained by borrowers, risk, profitability, capital, and liquidity requirements, regulation, central bank policy, and the need to settle with other banks. But it does mean that the popular picture of money still lags behind reality. We imagine money as objects, Most of it is relationships recorded in databases. The coins and notes in your pocket are the visible edge of a much larger structure of claims, debts, and settlement systems. Which brings us back to that Mesopotamian tablet. The technology around it has changed almost beyond recognition. Clay became papyrus and paper. Balance scales became mints. Metal stamps became printing presses. Ledgers became bank servers. Messengers became payment networks moving information around the planet in fractions of a second. But the underlying problem is strangely familiar. Who owes what? How much? In what unit? Who guarantees the record? Can the person receiving this claim pass it to somebody else? And will everyone still trust the system tomorrow? Those questions are older than coins. They may be older than writing. Money was one of humanity's answers to the problem of cooperating with people who could not simply rely on family memory and personal favors. It let obligations become measurable, then transferable, then standardized, then politically guaranteed, then represented by objects, then represented by paper, and finally represented largely by electronic records again. Every step made economic cooperation easier to scale. Every step created new opportunities for control. Once value could be measured, rulers could tax more systematically. Once payment could travel, merchants could build larger networks. Once coinage became standardized, armies and governments could move resources across territories more efficiently. Once paper claims circulated, states and banks could expand the money supply beyond available metal. Once banks could create deposit money through lending, credit could finance homes, factories, and businesses on an enormous scale. And every one of those powers could fail. Debts could become unpayable. Coins could be distrusted. Notes could be counterfeited. Governments could issue too much currency. Banks could collapse. A financial panic is what happens when a technology built from trust suddenly confronts the possibility that the trust was misplaced. That may be the central paradox of money. Humans spent thousands of years making money less physical while trying to make it feel more certain. A weighed lump of silver became a stamped guarantee. The guarantee became a paper promise. The paper promise became a bank account. The bank account became digits behind a piece of glass. At each stage, less of the value was located in the thing you could touch. More of it was located in the system connecting you to everyone else. So who invented money? No one. And almost everyone. There was no single morning when humanity switched from barter to cash. Instead, different societies assembled the pieces over thousands of years. Communities already understood gifts, obligations, and deferred repayment. Large settlements made memory insufficient. Administrators created accounting systems. Mesopotamian societies measured obligations in standardized quantities such as silver. Merchants learned to transfer claims across distance. Metal became weighed money. Lydia and other centers stamped standardized pieces into coinage. China independently developed its own coin traditions, then pushed monetary abstraction further with circulating paper. Banks transformed promises into transferable notes. Governments built fiat monetary systems. Commercial banks turned lending into deposit money. Money was not invented as one object. It was built as a system, and that system solved a problem deeper than barter. It allowed strangers to agree on a number. That sounds almost trivial. It is not. The moment a society can agree that a field, a day of labor, a shipment of grain, and a future debt can all be translated into the same abstract unit, people who have never met can coordinate their decisions. They can save for something that does not exist yet, borrow against future income, price work done by strangers, transfer wealth to people on the other side of the world, build businesses larger than any family, collect taxes from millions, finance wars, finance hospitals, speculate, invest, exploit, insure, donate, and keep score. Money does not tell society what should matter. It gives society a brutally efficient way to assign numbers to things that do. That power is why monetary history is inseparable from political history. Who may create money? Whose promise counts? Which debts will courts enforce? Which currency must taxes be paid in? Who receives new credit? Who bears the loss when trust collapses? Those questions sound like finance. They are questions about power. And they have been there from the beginning. The ancient clerk pressing marks into clay could not have imagined a contactless payment. A central bank, or a mortgage recorded across multiple computer systems. But the clerk would recognize the basic act. A person owes something. The amount must be recorded. Other people must believe the record. 4,000 years later, you can open a banking app and see your own version of that tablet. There may be no silver behind the number. There may not even be paper, just an entry in a ledger maintained by an institution, connected to other ledgers, protected by law, regulation, technology, and collective trust. The material changed. The idea survived. Money began when humans learned that value did not always need to be carried in your hand. Sometimes it could be carried in a record.